We have entered the month of May. I know it's hard to keep up with the days of the week right now. We've entered the month of May, which traditionally is the beginning of many celebrations of great life transitions. College finals and graduations and moving to that first job or internship. High school prom, walking across the stage to receive the diploma, making that decision about college. Wedding showers and bridal teas. Ceremonies are finalized, invitations are mailed. Retirement parties for those who want the freedom to travel in the summer, and so they choose the middle of the year to turn in their papers. Now, ordinarily, these moments are accompanied by the giving and receiving of gifts. The high school senior receives gift cards to Target to outfit their dorm room, perhaps a special piece of jewelry from the grandparents, or a memory book of pictures and mementos from a best friend. The college grad or the couple that's about to get married, they get the essentials for making a home: Pyrex casserole dishes, pots and pans, appliances, china sets, and new bedding. And the retiree gets that plaque from the company for years of service, perhaps a love offering from the rest of the staff to finally go on that long-anticipated European trip. There's gifts galore. And what's the usual response for receiving a gift like this? It's a thank you note, right? Now, hopefully, that note is sent out of a genuine sense of gratitude for what has been given, the time, the money, the energy put in, the recognition that this person didn't have to be so generous. But at least the thank you note is sent out of guilt because your mother instilled in you that it is the socially appropriate thing to do when you receive a graduation or a wedding present. In some ways, this letter that Paul writes to the Philippians is itself a letter of thanks, a thank you note. This is the third week we've been in this series that we're calling With Eager Longing. Each of these weeks we've been looking at Paul's letter to the Philippians. And we learned 3 weeks ago that Paul writes this letter while he is in prison. He sends that letter back to Philippi with Epaphroditus. Epaphroditus was a member of that church, and he had been sent from Philippi to Paul with a care package from that congregation to the apostle. Miss Alexis had made her fresh-baked homemade angel biscuits that Paul always raved about. Miss Harmonia, her classic deviled eggs with the little green olives on the top. 2 moist pieces of chocolate cake. Alexander, always attentive and logical, providing a new razor and some razor blades. Junia threw in some clean underwear and socks. The rest of the congregation gave some money to Paul's mission fund he was always trying to raise money for. They'd been too busy to go out and get anything special or unique. And so Paul, at the beginning of this letter, thanks the Philippians for this gift, and then he does so again here towards the end of the letter. He says, "I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned for me, but had no opportunity to show it." That's a good line. I rejoice greatly in gratitude to God for the gift of this congregation. But then Paul does something kind of curious. Take a look. He says, "Not that I'm referring to being in need, for I have learned to be content with whatever I have." Now, just before this section of gratitude, this thank you note at the end of the letter, Paul has just told the Philippians, you heard us read it, to continue doing the things they learned and heard and saw Paul do. Well, let me stop right here and caution all of our brides and grooms and potential graduates. I would not model my thank you notes for my gifts after Paul's letter to the Philippians here. It would be like saying, "Dear Mrs. Smith, thank you for the measuring cups and mixing bowls from our registry. While we will certainly use them, we didn't actually need them. We've learned to be content with what we already have. How is sweet Mrs. Smith, who taught your third grade Sunday school class and led the brownie troop, going to receive a thank you note that sounds like that? So, Paul is not Miss Manners. Perhaps the reason he writes such an awkward thank you note at this point is because Paul is always thinking theologically, and he's always trying to teach his congregations something. Even his gratitude must be grounded in the ultimate truth of his life, that he lives solely out of the free gift of God's grace in Jesus Christ. And he wants his congregation to live from that as well. What Paul knows is that Christian contentment doesn't come from the circumstances of our life. It is born out of God's grace. That contentment is a counter-testimony to the culture around Paul, and it's certainly a counter-testimony to the culture around us, a culture that celebrates achievement and values what we do by our performance. Graduations, marriages, retirement celebrations, these are acknowledgments of external achievements, part of a broader American culture that tells us that we need to set goals, and these are the things that we ought to be pursuing with our life. And so there's this pressure on the high school senior that they need to pick the right college, which leads to this terrifying anxiety of what happens if I choose the wrong one? And then the college student, they're pressured into a major and a career, and you better find the thing that's going to fulfill you for the rest of your days, or else you're going to be miserable. Those looking for a life partner have to find somebody attractive, funny, stable, beautiful, wealthy enough to make the other person feel the way that they want to feel. Everything from the Fitbit buzzing on our wrist, informing us that we've taken enough steps that day, to the financial plans that we need. We've got to have the emergency savings and the retirement savings and the college fund and the vacation fund and the gift fund and the regular budget of our life, to that ever-present social media where we can always compare what other people have or what other people are doing to what we have and what we are doing, and then that platform is configured in such a way that the news feed is never ending. You never reach the terminus, so you can always keep looking at what everybody else is up to. But here's what Paul knows. And here's what Christians throughout our history have known. Whether you go to JMU or Yale, whether you major in engineering or in social work, whether you have all your financial goals met or you don't, whether you find the most beautiful, funny, wealthy partner or someone adequately attentive, you are always yourself wherever you go. No matter what you look like, no matter what trips you take, no matter where you live, you're still the one in the body that you work so hard to sculpt. You're the one in the airplane going on that vacation. You are the resident of that brand new home. And if your mind and heart are discontented, you will always see what others have or what others are doing, or you will always note what disaster might be lurking around the corner that you haven't prepared for, and anxiety and paranoia will pack them into your suitcase no matter how far you try to run. Dan Gilbert is a psychologist. He studies happiness. And he says that we as human beings experience two kinds of happiness. There's a natural happiness, which is what I've been describing thus far. This is the happiness we feel when we get what we have been working toward. We set a goal, we meet the goal, and we feel happy. But there's another kind of happiness, and Gilbert calls this synthetic happiness. And this is the happiness we feel when things don't turn out our way. It's the people who see the silver lining in the difficulty, the person who learns the lesson in grief, the individual who's overlooked for the job promotion but still has a reason to live. And Gilbert says that he has seen in his studies that people with synthetic happiness are just as happy, if not more so, than the people who achieve this natural happiness. Because the way our brain works, when it comes to our emotional well-being, the good that we anticipate for achieving a goal is never as good as we anticipate. And the bad things that we expect are never as bad as we assume. Gilbert would describe Paul's contentment here in Philippians as this kind of synthetic happiness. Paul does not need external success in order to feel contentment. He knows that he can do all things through Christ who gives him strength. Now, that doesn't mean that Paul's going to win a college football national championship and the Heisman Trophy as Tim Tebow did, who frequently cited this verse wearing it in the eye black under his eyes when he played for the University of Florida. Paul means he can endure whatever the present circumstances are because he has the grace of Jesus always. So whether he's in plenty or he is in need, whether he is well-fed or whether he is hungry, Paul does not spend all of his waking hours thinking continually about what he does not have. He thinks on what is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, and commendable. He keeps doing what God has called him to do, no matter what his present circumstances are. So where Paul may not be much of a model for us in writing thank you notes, he does provide us a way to understand our contentment in this kind of time. He doesn't see his contentment as a synthetic happiness. He differs from Dan Gilbert in this way. He sees his contentment as something that comes from God, not something that we create for ourselves. It's the delight that is found in a God who knows us through and through and loves us still and all. That kind of contentment is a blueprint for us in this time of isolation, loneliness, and disruption that this pandemic has caused. I know graduation, weddings, retirement celebrations, they are not going to look like natural happiness, like what we have been working for and expecting and hoping for. That natural happiness is not going to be achieved, and there is genuine lament and grief in that. But that grief cannot overwhelm the Christian heart, because our worth is not ultimately found in walking across a stage and taking a diploma. Our worth is not in the beautiful dress that we process down the aisle in. It is not found in the number of years that we've committed to the company. We find our value in the free grace of God. And nothing that we have done has earned us that grace, and nothing that is taken away can ever remove that love and grace from us. So when you feel the dark clouds forming and the difficulties of this time feel like they are overwhelming you, remember, think once more upon your worth in God. What is true, honorable, just, pure, pleasing, and commendable. Remember that above everything else, you are a beloved child of God, a child of grace. Keep witnessing as you are able, even as our lives have these restrictions on them and our usual patterns are disrupted. For we can endure all things, even the difficulties and disruptions of a pandemic, through Christ, who is our strength.